Hey everybody, listen, thanks for tuning in to today's episode. Of course, this is My Church Foundation. I'm Cassie Bennett, your host, and today we're going to explore the rest of what we started talking about in our last discussion about the Ecclesia of God, the Church of God. And we're also talking about, I'm going to finish up what happened in the testimony that we encountered one evening as we were praying. And we're going to talk about the application of that supernatural experience in what the church is called to do, enabled to do, and really required to do. And so we're going to be talking about that as it relates to not just the ecclesia of God, but also the eschatology, the eschaton, the study of last things. So we're going to be looking at both the ecclesia and eschatology together today. Now, let's quickly give a little review of what we got into in our last discussion about the ecclesia of God. You know, we were talking about how that our church, our team, our ministry leadership team was preparing for a Pentecost celebration that was going to be just about 1 week away. We had been announcing it on Trinity Broadcasting Network. We had been announcing it in our church to our members just for months. And turns out that so many people were enthused and excited about coming and experiencing something new that they invited their friends and family, and we were told that it was going to be great. So we prayed, and I talked a little bit about the fact that I began to see what was impossible to view as I was standing there in a prayer session where we had gathered evening by evening the week before the Pentecost celebration. We prayed and asked God to show us what he was doing, because remember, in the scripture, Jesus would say something like this. He would say, I, the Son of Man, can only do what I see my Father doing, and I only say what I hear my Father saying. So we piggybacked that prayer, and we said, would you show us what you are doing 7 days from now? Would you show us what you have on your mind in this special service that was coming up several days from now? And we are going to join you in whatever you show us that you're doing. And so sure enough, he began to show us in the supernatural what was going to take place. And so I'm standing there in the sanctuary. I saw a person who was not there yet. And, you know, I saw what she was wearing. I was told supernaturally that she had a blood condition. It was confirmed by a person who was there who heard the same thing and announced it. And it helped me to see that God could show whatever he wanted to show to whoever he wanted to show it to. But the reason why I wanted to review that story a little bit today is because I want you to know that we experienced that. And over the course of about 3 or 4 days of us meeting nightly to pray, asking the same question, what, Lord, are you doing several days from now in this special service? And night by night, he showed me, and many other people there, but he showed us exactly what he was doing. I saw the lady in beige. I call her my lady in beige. I saw several other individuals who were not in the building when we were praying, but I could clearly see them. I could see what they were wearing. I could see where they were sitting or standing. I was made aware supernaturally of what their ailment was or what their condition was. And so come that Sunday morning, I mean, here's the thing. You know, that night I remember asking the Lord, I said, okay, it's obvious that there's something more to Christianity than I've been taught. And I said, why have you never shown me this before? You know, I had been a Christian for several years. I was filled with the Spirit and regularly prayed in the Spirit. And I was curious. I said, you know, why have you never shown me this before? And I'm telling you the gospel truth. Before I could finish asking that question, the answer was tied to the last statement. When I said, why have you never shown me this supernatural enablement before? He said immediately, because you never asked. You know, this is one of the reasons why we want to share this with you, because some things God brings to us, and other things He instructs us to pursue. And so when I pursued more was waiting. But if I'd never asked any questions, I probably would have never gained that experience and had a little bit more of an expanded perspective on who we are, what we have, and why we have it. So here's what happened that Sunday morning. You know, we gathered the way we do every Sunday. You know, we were in the back and service was about to start. And we prayed and had asked God to show us what He was doing at 9 o'clock that Sunday morning. So at 9 o'clock, right before we started, I came and peeked into the sanctuary where it had the first level, then it had the balcony level. There were several hundred people there that Sunday, more than usual. And when I peeked into the sanctuary, you know, I was looking specifically for the lady in beige. The lady, I had seen what she's wearing, where she was standing, and what was wrong with her. I had seen her in the supernatural several days before, and sure enough, she was there. And now I would have been satisfied if she was anywhere in the sanctuary. But to my amazement, she was not only in the sanctuary, but she was standing in the exact position that I had seen her 6 days earlier. She was wearing the beige. She was standing where most of the other congregational members were sitting still, but she was standing, looking at the clock in anticipation of the service kicking off. And so there she was. And I said, well, gosh, if she's there, wearing the exact thing I'd seen her in several days earlier, then also some of the others that I had seen in prayer should be there. And to my amazement, every single one of the people that I had seen days in advance were in their place wearing the exact clothes. Everything was exactly the way I had seen it when I was praying, that God showed it to me. You know, and I won't belabor the time during this session to talk about the other people I saw, but they were all there, along with hundreds of others that I didn't see. So I said, okay, this is more than just, you know, kind of a spooky spiritual thing that's happened to me. This is a brand new reality. And so sure enough, we got into the service, did our praise and worship, and when it came time for ministry, we simply asked people to come forward who had needs. As they came forward, we were already armed with the knowledge of who they were, at least by association, what they're wearing, what was wrong with them. And so we were able to more effectively minister to these people the things that they needed, whether it was healing, whether it was psychological strength, no matter what it was. God had specifically shown it to the 10 of us, and we were able to more effectively minister to people as the crowds came to each one of the ministers to receive prayer and some level of ministry. Now, you know, one of the things that excites me to tell you this, we're going to be looking at some scriptures that help us to get into what I call the underpinnings of our faith. But it's important for me to say this to you at this point, because as I would talk to people about the experience And I would begin to tell them the sequence of events and what happened. I got a check in my spirit. Now, some of you won't understand what I'm talking about, but I'm talking to those who do. I got a check in my spirit, and it was like, I felt like I was saying something wrong as I was telling the details. You know, that young lady, for example, in beige, she had come, she did end up having a blood condition by her own confession. She said, you know, I don't know what's wrong, but recently I've gone to the doctor, she said, and I have, my blood pressure was extremely low. She said, I don't know what that means. It's never been extremely low like that. And so she was seen by the physician, and, you know, everything was fine. But the blood condition, we had seen it, prayed for her, and she received healing. Now, as I have been telling this story, and all the other people that I saw ahead of time, I felt a check in my spirit as though what I was saying wasn't true. And I asked the Lord, I said, wait a minute now, I've got a check in my spirit as though what I'm saying isn't true. You know what you showed us. You heard us ask you specifics. Why am I feeling like I didn't do this? What are you trying to communicate to me, Lord? And here's what he showed me. He said, don't get it twisted. He said, you asked me what I, the Lord, was doing in that service multiple days away, still in your future. And the way you're describing it sounds like something that you did on that day. He said, and Jesus said, I can only do what I see my Father doing. He said, the way you're telling that testimony almost sounds like you're saying, this is what you did in that service. And he said, it is important for you to get it right. Talk about, for my glory, talk about what I showed you that I was doing, he said, and that I fulfilled everything that I promised you that you would see and you would experience, but it came as a result of me. And I was going to do that whether you were in that service or not. But you asked me to show you, and so I gave you a preview. I showed you in advance. I gave you exactly what you asked for. And so it did happen. I have witnesses and all that, but more than just our testimony, it's imperative as we consider who we are and whether or not it's even possible to have certain experiences like this as the church. Let's take a look again at a few scriptures and move forward from there. Okay? Now, one of the scriptures I want you to review is in Daniel, the 7th chapter. And this is where Daniel was praying, and he kept looking in the night visions, and Daniel saw the Lord coming up to the Ancient of Days. And in the earth, in the future, Daniel was seeing the resurrection and the ascension of Christ. And as Jesus was presented before the Ancient of Days, as he describes in Daniel chapter 7, looking around verse 13 and on, it says that he came up as the Son of Man, Jesus' favorite term for himself. He was presented before the Ancient of Days, and Jesus received a kingdom and several other things, the glory and the power. And then it starts talking about us. It starts talking about that he poured out his Spirit, and it talks about in verse 18, it says, but the saints of the highest one will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and all ages to come. Then, if you jump down here, I know you're going to read this on your own, but you jump down here to verse 22, or verse 21 says, I kept looking, and he saw that there was a horn waging war against the saints and overpowering them until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was passed in favor of the saints of the highest one. I'm talking about you and me. And it says, and the time arrived when the saints took possession of the kingdom. That's talking about us. And so then we have to jump over to, and please, I know you're going to read this, but let's look over in St. Matthew. And as we're turning over to Matthew to talk about, again, the church and who we are, and then we're going to reach for a moment beyond eschatology, or ecclesiology, and we're going to reach into some eschatology. You see, this is the beauty of a systematic theology. When someone says that it's impossible for the church to have operated in any of this supernatural endowment because we're still dealing with the first coming and not the second coming, then we're at an intersection where somebody better do some serious explaining. And the scripture does that. And we're challenging you to do that too. Because here's what happened. Remember in Matthew chapter 16, it says, and this is again where Jesus was talking to the guys, and a lot of political upheaval was going on in that time. And he was now introducing the church. And here's what he said. Jesus said, when he was talking to Peter, and I know you know this, but he was talking to Peter and all the guys, and he said, who do men say that I am? The Son of Man. Who do they say I am? And they said, some said Elijah, some said Muhammad, some said, not, whatever. And so Jesus said, well, who do you say that I am? And Peter just screams out, you are the Christ. You are the Son of the living God. And then Jesus immediately picked up on it. And he said, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And then this is what Jesus did. And let me say this to you. I'm just going to interject this. This pattern of communication from the King during times that we need to know something and make solid quality decisions, there is a key of the kingdom that Jesus promised that he was going to give them. But here's one of them. Here's what Jesus did. Whenever he was presented with a serious challenge in his present reality, as he was in his body walking in the earth during that 3.5 years of ministry, whenever he needed to know something, he would ask the Father, and he would also receive an unction to revisit something already written. He would say, for example, in Isaiah 61, when Jesus would quote Isaiah, he would quote Isaiah 61, when he was handed the book, Jesus would find the place where it was written, and he would quote what was already historically accurately spoken by the prophets. And then he would claim in his present reality the truth of that. And then he would point to a future that was based on that. And that key to the kingdom is one that we use now, and it was present here. Because here's what Jesus said to Peter. He said, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And also I say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock of revelation, this truth about who I am, the Son of the living God, I'm going to build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not overpower it. Then he said, I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. In other words, Peter, standing in the earth, was receiving communication from the Father who was in heaven. And when Peter spoke, Jesus grabbed it and began to tell Peter more than Peter expected to learn. This is a tremendous key of the kingdom. Jesus understands that our perspective is sometimes limited. But that's why he sent the Holy Spirit, to expand our perspective into the truth that's already been established, so that upon established, proven statements of the prophets, we would be able to grab a truth, pull it into our present reality, and then make the kind of bold statements that would either prove you to be a liar or that you're operating by the revelation of the truth of the Son of God. And so that's one of the things that happened. But now, the reason why I wanted to bring it up now and tie this what I'm calling an eschatological perspective, because Jesus was the eschaton. He is the eschaton. He is the last thing. All the prophets talked about events in the supernatural, and as they projected them into the future, they were talking about not the future from this year forward, but from where they were forward to the time when Jesus came. And so here's Jesus, and you know, we're not going to be able to discuss much more in this session, but I need you to get this. I need you to get this. That during the time that Jesus walked the earth, he understood that when it was time for him to interject more than they asked for, he was so wise in how he did it. For example, once the revelation had opened up and he explained to Peter, this is what you've received, Jesus started going into detail. He started talking about, listen, I'm going to give you the keys to the kingdom, and whatever's bound is going to be bound, whatever's loose is going to be loose. Peter didn't ask him all that. But then Jesus keeps going. He keeps going. And he says, in verse 21, it says that from that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed and be raised up on the third day. They didn't ask him all that. But he knew, while their mind is open, while they're receiving supernatural download from the Father, then I need to join what the Father's doing and give them some more details that are about to happen in the future. So when they begin to experience those things, they won't freak out. And so he goes into these details that Peter didn't ask for. And the rest of the guys there are receiving this instruction. But here's what happens. Peter, bless his heart, he said, man, in verse 22, paraphrase, he basically said, man, you're messing up. Look, we got these guys ready to commit. And here you are talking about going to Jerusalem and being captured and being imprisoned and being crucified and dying. And he said, man, look, we're not going to get any votes like this. Nobody's going to stay on the team. We're not going to vote, you know. And he could see people kind of getting discouraged. They were intrigued, but that intrigue in their minds did not automatically mean they were going to go straight from their rally to an inauguration. And so what Jesus did, as he was giving them the details, he reached in and he understood that it was necessary to show them something, just like it was necessary to show us what he was doing days away when we saw the people before they were there and all that. This is what Jesus did. He said, I've given them revelation, but it's not applicable to their situation without them understanding something more supernatural. And so the next week, he took them up to the Mount of Transfiguration. It's in the same chapter. You know, he said in verse 28, he says, truly I say to you, there are some of those of you who are standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. There he is using that Son of Man term. There he is talking to those guys right then and what it would mean to them. And he pointed to a future that they were going to see and experience during that time, which they did. And so it's these kind of supernatural revelations, encounters, that he always ties back to Scripture. And so when he took them the next week, 6 days later, he took them to the Mount of Transfiguration, and they saw Jesus consulting with the prophets in order for him to operate in that present day according to historical relevance, so that they would begin to operate in the supernatural and handle the demonic oppression that was taking place, all those things. We'll talk about that in another episode as we talk more about Jesus being the eschaton. And we'll talk about eschatology, the study of last things, and how the church that Jesus built, who he said was going to basically destroy the gates of hell and bring us into another level of intimate relationship with him and purposeful living. You got to get in on this. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you about these scriptures the next time. Hey everyone, thanks again for joining us on today's episode of My Church Foundation, where we've been discussing the Ecclesia of God, which is the Church of God, and we've been talking about a little bit of the eschaton, the study of last things. In both cases, Jesus is the center of attention. If you're receiving value from the information that we're sharing session by session, we'd like you to help us and do a couple of things. Number one, we'd like for you to subscribe. To subscribe. Because that way, anytime we put out new content, you are automatically keyed in and it pops up in your device so that you can keep up with what's going on with us here at My Church Foundation. Secondly, we'd like for you to leave a comment. You may have a question or a comment about any of the information that we're sharing. That's the best way for us to get the question and get you the answers that you're after. And then also, we'd like for you to tell your friends and family, because if they have any questions or if there are things that you want them to know, it may be easier for them to hear it from another party. So let people know. We'd like for you to like, we'd like for you to share. Most of all, we'd like for you to keep watching. Thanks again.